I want to share with you some interesting statistics. This is a poll from the Cato Institute. A new national survey from the Cato Institute conducted with 2,253 Americans regarding the 250th anniversary finds nearly half, 46%, of Americans do not know what America's 250th anniversary commemorates. A little more than half, 53%, correctly answered that it was the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. I remember when I was 11, it was the bicentennial. And bicentennial fever was absolutely everywhere. All the kids collected the bicentennial quarters. We thought we were going to go through college, all these bicentennial quarters, the value of these quarters. There were special magazines on magazine racks in every candy store and every grocery store and every convenience store. You couldn't, it was on the TV, it was all over the place. It was in New York, and I remember watching on TV the tall ships sailing into New York Harbor. It was extraordinary. And I don't know if I simply was not clued in because I was only 11, but I think I would have noticed something. But I got to say that the atmosphere was very different, because I don't remember at the age of 11 half the country saying, well, you've politicized the bicentennial, and since Gerald Ford is in office, Democrats can't possibly celebrate the bicentennial. The celebration is ruined, and we're not even going to, because we don't even love our country. We live in a challenging circumstance today. It's very different. In one lifetime, a 50-year period of time, there's been a sea change in the attitudes of people regarding our nation. But I must share with you that it is not only in the New Testament that we are implored to pray for those who are in authority over us, but it is a maxim that is embedded deeply within the prophetic literature in the Hebrew Bible. And we see in Jeremiah 29, verse 7, the Word of God says, seek the welfare of the city where I've sent you into exile, to which you might say, as a Jewish person who has been exiled in Babylon, but they've just done terrible things to me and my family. They've removed our people from the land. They've destroyed our temple. They have destroyed our way of life. They've disrupted everything. They're a bunch of pagans. But nonetheless, the Lord instructs the Jewish people to seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile. Ultimately, they are but pawns in my plan and program for my people. I am still in charge. Therefore, seek their welfare. And pray to the Lord on its behalf. For in its welfare, you will have welfare. And I believe that this is a great maxim for our lives. We don't always agree with the government that we have. We don't always like the government that we have, or particular personalities. And you may not like the governor, or you may not like your senator, or you may not like your president, or you may not like your whatever, congressman, represent. We must pray for our nation. We must pray for our leaders. For in its welfare, we will have welfare. Today, I want to talk to you about our responsibility to our government. Something very, very important. If I can find it. There we go. We're going to today, as we have in the past, and today more appropriately than any other day that we've ever done this, we're going to read through the Declaration of Independence. When we hear these words aloud, we're going to remember what we're really doing. See, the Declaration, you know, it's not sacred scripture. But the thing about the Declaration is that it was written by people who were steeped in Scripture. When Jefferson, rest in peace, when he wrote of a creator who endows all people with unalienable rights, when the founders looked to providence, as we'll see, and appealed to the supreme judge of the world, they were drawing on the moral vision of the Hebrew Bible. They were drawing on the conviction that every human being is made in the image of God and that no king, no government stands above the truth. And here at our Messianic congregation, Beth, Shalom, we know something of what it means to hold two loves together. Love for the God of Israel and the Scriptures given to the Jewish people, and a love for the nation we call home. And so today, as we hear these seminal words, we listen not as substitute for our worship, but we listen as an act of gratitude and of responsibility. What are we grateful for? What are we responsible to? A land that, however imperfectly, has tried to live out the belief that liberty and justice are gifts from God, not grants from the government. It is always critical for us to remember that our liberties do not come from the government, they come from God. So, let's read together. We'll go through this. In Congress, July 4th, 1776. By the way, a phenomenal film if you like films in theaters. I know many of us have gone out of the habit. But limited release for this weekend, I believe. I don't know how long it will play. But we saw a tremendous film yesterday called Young Washington. Very good, very accurate, very entertaining, very exciting, well worth your time and investment. I learned things about, and even as a history teacher, you can learn. I learned things about George Washington, young Washington, that I was unaware of, or the things that I was aware of, seeing it on celluloid, fleshed it out for me. So I strongly recommend Young Washington to you while it is still playing. I look forward next year to the sequel, Middle-Aged Washington, and the conclusion of the trilogy, if they ever film it, Geriatric Washington. But nonetheless, get a head start on that. In Congress, July 4th, 1776, 250 years ago today, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. I have highlighted there, and I have highlighted throughout, every time God is referenced. This is the God of the Declaration of Independence, the God that our founding fathers spoke of and is preserved in their writings, is not contrary to what you may have learned in school, as I did, that our founding fathers were all deists. Deists were those who believed that God was like a watchmaker who wound up the watch and let it spin. Simply let fly what God was going to do. But we see that the laws of nature and of God, nature's God, entitle them a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. So, again, remember that the founding fathers, our founding document here, speak of the laws of nature and of nature's God. God is absolutely involved in the comings and goings of our nation, of our government. God is not wound up the watch and then taken a powder to let things spin out as they're going to spin. God is actively involved in the lives of the nation which we serve him. Well, those causes which impel them to the separation, here we go. We hold these truths. What truths? Hang on. These truths that we're about to get to. Be patient. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. In other words, a God who winds things up and then takes a vacation. That's not the God that's being referenced in our founding documents. This is a God who is concerned. This is a God who cares. This is a God who takes action. Being endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Who is that? That's us. Government derives its powers from our consent, we the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, what ends? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Never any form of government becomes destructive of those ends. It's the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. So in a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing Invariably, the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism. It is their right. Whose right? The people's right. It is their right. It is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies. There's 13 of them at the time. And such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government, i.e., monarchy. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations. It's the only time I get to actually say that word all year, usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. And what follows in the declaration, we're not going to list them all, but this is where in the document you have a list of 27 published grievances. 27 published. What are those usurpations? What are those grievances? What are those abuses? They list 27 of them. Then it continues. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress. In the most humble terms, our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is just marred, thus marred in every act which may define a tyrant, is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. We have been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. Now we have been wanting in attentions to our British, nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. It's not like we're not trying, guys. We've warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us, taxation without representation, etc., etc. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow those usurpations which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world, one more reference to our God who is active in our affairs. We must appeal to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intention. We do in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. And that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, again, a deist God does not protect, it does not actively intervene in creation at all. He winds things up and lets it run. Our founders were not deists. Perhaps a few were. But the language that they use in our founding documents, our language, and in our writings, are languages of people who are deeply steeped in the Bible, both Testaments. So again, for the support of this declaration with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. That is the Declaration of Independence. Now, I've skipped over the grievances, the list of grievances, so that the world could see what Great Britain was doing, what the king was doing, that so riled up the people. But nonetheless, this is our founding document. This, along with the Constitution, is what defines us. It sets the parameters, the guidelines, the borders, the sandbox in which our nation resides. And so on this 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence and its subsequent publication throughout the colonies, it's good to go back for us today, 250 years and every single year thereafter, to read what defines us as a nation, so that we don't wind up being like millennials or worse, Generation Z, with no clue as to what our nation is, what our history is, who we are. We as believers of all people, we should have a great concept, a firm idea of what our nation stands for, what it means to be an American, why we exist, why we're not still attached to Great Britain, why we're not Europe, what makes us different. It doesn't make us perfect. We strive for a more perfect union. After all, we didn't pop out as a perfect union, but we popped out as a purposeful union. And of course, we're more than 13 states today, but nonetheless, we as a nation must forge forward, because we are largely comprised of believers like ourselves, and if each one of us is fulfilling the responsibility that Jeremiah spells out, praying for the welfare of our nation and knowing specifically what to pray for and how to pray for, then we can entrust ourselves to divine providence, to our God. It's one of the religious responsibilities, one of the religious duties that God has appointed for us. It's not all sharing the gospel and praying for the rapture to quickly take me, Jesus, now. Take me soon. We do pray for the soon return of our Messiah. But while we are here, we have a duty and a responsibility to the land that we've been entrusted to pray for. It is our duty. It is our sacred honor that is on the line. I have listed here several of the grievances. I don't think we need to rehearse them. This one, number 7, was all about preventing immigration from immigrants from coming to America, charging levies on them. I love this one, actually, is one of my favorites because it's an evergreen one. He, the king, has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our peoples and eat out their substance. If that doesn't describe the deep state, I don't know what does. Government is the whole point of the Constitution, as we will see. This today is the first in a series of 3, July, August, and September, that we'll be reviewing and talking about our nation. This today, our Declaration of Independence. In August, we will examine the letter that General Washington, that President Washington rather, sent to the oldest Jewish synagogue in the colonies at the time. It is, again, a founding document on religious freedom and tolerance of various different religions. And then in September, we will spend a morning examining the theological implications regarding the Constitution. So no one at this congregation could, or watching at home, will ever be able to accuse us of not fulfilling our responsibility as informed citizens serving the nation that God has placed us in, or in which God has placed us. Well, going on, okay, subject to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution, right? Imported tax, well, this is another evergreen. Number 17, taxes on us without our consent. That lives on, sadly, but true. Depriving, in many cases, the benefit of trial by jury also lives on in many instances. Speedy trial. Taking away our charters, et cetera, 22. And then the final one in 27, number 27. Excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages. This sounds so politically incorrect. Well, that's, at the time, the Native Americans were known as Indian savages. I can't help that, that's the way it was. And King George would pay them to attack his own people. Now, there was a 28th Amendment. Didn't make it, however. I've read this one before at length. Anybody remember what the 28th Amendment is about? The 28th grievance, rather. Grievance, thank you. It didn't make it. It was too controversial. In the 13 states. Getting rid of slavery? Yeah. This is the 28th one. I want to show you the heart of Jefferson and more than half of our 13 colonies at the time. It wouldn't pass because the southern states, certain southern states, not all of them, certain southern states would not agree to include this grievance. And it was cut this one or lose everything. And so they made a compromise, politics, right? But I want to show you the heart of our founding fathers. He, King George, has waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating in its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere, or to incur miserable deaths in their transportation thither. This piratical warfare, the opprobrium of infidel powers, is the warfare of the Christian King of Great Britain, determined to keep open a market where men should be bought and sold. He has prostituted his negative for suppressing every legislative attempt to prohibit or restrain this execrable commerce. It's not as if certain colonies did not attempt to pass laws making slavery illegal, outlawing it. But when they attempted, King George and the Parliament overruled them. And that this assembly of horrors might want no fact of distinguished, I'm going to read it from here, might want no fact of distinguished dye, he is now exciting those very people to rise in arms among us and to purchase that liberty of which he has deprived them by murdering the people on whom he has uprooted them. In other words, he is fomenting rebellion among the slave population, thus paying off former crimes committed against the liberties of one people with crimes which he urges them to commit against the lives of another. Imagine, if you will, if that grievance had but been included in our declaration. What heartbreak, what pain, warfare, and death and suffering we could have avoided. But alas, not everybody was on the same page. And all 13 colonies needed to row together. Right? So it is a historical artifact which simply reveals the heart of most of our founding fathers, and gives you piece of evidence to provide against your kids when they come home from college or high school, or your grandkids or your nieces, nephews, whatever, or some punk on the street tells you what a terrible nation are, and that our original sin is slavery, et cetera, and how the entirety of the American people are tainted. Wasn't the heart of all of the people. Just FYI. Lest you think that I'm reading too much into the Declaration of Independence, let's see the activity of the Americans after the Declaration of Independence. The founders reached instinctively for Israel's national narrative. Why? Because it was a ready-made vocabulary in the Western tradition for talking about corporate liberty, talking about covenant obligation, and discussing divine justice standing against tyranny. And that should be a natural point of pride for a congregation like ours that is rooted in Jewish identity and identification. The outsized shadow that the Hebrew Scriptures cast over America's self-understanding, balanced by the caution, of course, that these are borrowed images. These are analogies, not fulfilled promises. The promises to Israel remain Israel's, of course. But the imagery proved to be universally portable. America is not the new Israel, just as the church is not the new, but nonetheless, the imagery was directly applicable in a society where 99% of the people, and that may be a low estimate, were biblically literate and attended religious services, mostly Christian, very small percentage Jewish. We'll talk about that in August, the anniversary of Washington's letter to the synagogue. But I'm showing you, of course, you know the Liberty Bell. Adrian and I are going to take a pilgrimage to Philadelphia and to D.C. in the fall, after the fall festivals, to celebrate the anniversary. But you know what's on the Liberty Bell? A direct quotation of Leviticus 25:10. You know where its context is. It's not the entire context of the passage, Leviticus 25:10. It's talking about the year of Yuval, the year of what we call Jubilee, the year of release. Right? But in context, you shall hallow the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubilee to you. Now, for us, reading as we do the Torah and taking the Torah literally, we understand that that verse is not talking about liberty in the abstract. Yeah, let's proclaim liberty in some abstraction. It's specifically regarding the Jubilee year when all debts are canceled, all Israelites who had sold themselves into slavery were freed, and the land reverted to its original owners. And you know, the bell was not commissioned after the Declaration. It was not commissioned after the Revolution. It was commissioned in 1751, decades before independence, to proclaim the Jubilee year. It was the Jubilee year of the Pennsylvania's 50th anniversary of their charter. Later on, of course, it got attached to revolutionary and abolitionist, again talking about slavery, abolitionist meaning. That's one cherry on the top. But this is a two-cherry Sunday, my friends, today. And we're going to close with a discussion of the Great Seal. Now, you know this Great Seal. Say, what the heck is that? I got an eagle. We got all right. That is what it is. But I want you to know the story behind the story. Or as Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story. Well, the Declaration was adopted July 4th, 1776, 250 years ago. Continental Congress appointed another committee. What is Congress good for? But to appoint committees, same as it is now, right? But that committee was a special select committee. It was consisting of Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. And what the committee was assigned to do was to propose a great seal for the new nation. Now, Franklin and Jefferson, independently, they reached together without consultation, but they both reached back to the Exodus story. They reached back to our pal Moses as their central image. When they thought about the seal of America, they wanted Moses. They wanted Israel to be represented. What did Franklin propose? And again, I just have a picture of what it is today, not of their proposals. Benjamin Franklin suggested depicting Moses standing on the shore, arms outstretched, like Charlton Heston, causing the Red Sea to overwhelm Pharaoh's army and the chariots. And Franklin's suggested motto for our nation, for the Great Seal: rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. Thomas Jefferson, his design was similar, but was split into a front side and a back side. One side showed the children of Israel in the wilderness, led by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, and including Moses extending his hand over the sea, drowning the Egyptians. Now, the other side was Saxon chiefs depicting Jefferson's interest in the Anglo-Saxon origins of English liberty. If you think about American liberty, it is the Hebrew Bible, it is the scriptures meeting the great works of the Enlightenment and colliding into one great new idea, American freedom. Wasn't a perfect collision, and we see the results of what they both lost. They both lost out. John Adams, he didn't go for a Bible image. He went for Hercules. But John Adams didn't win, and Ben Franklin didn't win, and Jefferson didn't win. But why did this matter to Jefferson and to Franklin? Moses leading an oppressed people out of bondage against a tyrannical ruler was an obvious typological match to the American colonies breaking away from Britain, and it cast for them the revolution. They thought of the revolution as a kind of new exodus, divine deliverance from oppression. And of course, in the role of Pharaoh, none other than old King George. So the founders saw the Exodus as the paradigmatic story of liberation from tyranny, which is worth noting for how it resonates with New Testament teaching and, of course, the ultimate redefinition of ultimate deliverance for Yeshua. Because politics only takes us so far, after all. Right? Lest you think that I believe politics is the be-all to end-all, and that the American story is the pinnacle of holy stories. No, I just appreciate their use of Scripture. And I appreciate how their concepts leading to its ultimate fulfillment in liberation from the tyranny of sin by our Messiah, Yeshua, through his death, burial, and resurrection. And so on this July 4th, this day of independence, if there's anyone who right now or at home is not already dependent on our Messiah, on our Lord, on Jesus, Yeshua, then this great day of American independence should be a tremendous opportunity for you to proclaim your dependence on our God. As the founders did in the Declaration, the entirety of the Declaration, with all of their flowery language of Thomas Jefferson, with all the grievances that were listed, the ones that I shared, the ones that I didn't share, with all the preamble, et cetera, in the course of human events, blah, 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 underlying our founding documents is very clearly a deep and abiding dependence on God. And I can't think of a better way to celebrate American independence than for us to reiterate and reestablish our dependence on the God who not only superintended the birth of America, but superintends us even as we speak now. As he watches out for all nations, as he gathers and sets his angels out, responsible for this nation, that nation, surely there is an angel that is responsible for this nation. There is no other satisfying explanation for our nation's continued existence and success than God, the hand of providence, as the founders would say, watching out and directing our steps. Let's stand for the Aaronic benediction.